There are different ways to read a philosophical work, especially if it's one from the past. You can look at it from the perspective of a search for universal truth, in a way independent from its author and historical context. If you want to do that, you better not read the chapters called About Women or Thoughts on the Female. You can also regard them as deeply embedded in their context, as a development towards schools of thought today, and as a reflection of their potential historical influences. Today, I want to look at Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morality in what I would see as a third way, oriented towards the cultivation of our own minds. I will go through the work content-wise and explain Nietzsche's arguments, but also zoom in at times to add modern perspectives and ways in which these thoughts were developed further by other thinkers. This will be the first video, analyzing the preface and the first essay of the polemic on the Genealogy of Morality. Nietzsche's goal for this work of his is to take a critical, skeptical look at the value judgments good and evil, or bad. He sets out to do so in the form of a genealogy, meaning, in this case, a historical approach to questions of philosophy, as opposed to other philosophers that look at ethics from a universal perspective, independent of culture and time, searching for absolute truths and values. A genealogy of morality looks at a specific place and its discourse over what good and bad means. And this is exactly what Nietzsche wants to do regarding European history. He criticizes others that try to describe a history of morality as imposing the idea of inherently existing concepts of morality onto the past, and not looking at what good and evil really meant throughout time. He himself sees morality as culturally created and not biologically part of humanity. As a quick detour from that, this thought has always been really interesting to me. It's not a claim unique to Nietzsche, but he is one of its proponents. What is so crucial about this is the distinction between culture and nature that lies underneath, and where this culture part of humanity begins and ends. From a materialist perspective, we, after all, are just bodies made up of matter that is part of the world, and this world is what we usually call nature. But it also brought up these creatures that live lives completely different to all other animals and that distinguish something called culture that makes them want to act good or avoid evil actions, to enable living in bigger groups that mutually support each other because we are so extremely vulnerable the first years of our lives, maybe. Anyway, back to Nietzsche. He describes the goal of his polemic to be an analysis of the conditions under which we invented the value judgments good and evil, and to challenge the views we hold about them. He also says that if someone misunderstands the text, he feels like that's not really his fault, because they could have and should read his other work. So yeah, I think I'm gonna apply this technique for my videos as well. It's a really good technique. The first essay distinguishes two different approaches to morality that have existed throughout time. First, as a general approach to the genealogy, he urges us to act with what I would call outcome independence. We cannot impose anything. We cannot look at the past and want humans to be inherently good. We have to live with the option that our analysis comes to the conclusion that they aren't. This, while of course realistically impossible to fully embrace, is always an important strategy for any philosophical inquiry. Actually, even for human interactions and conversations or scientific research. If I start reading up about a topic and already impose my desired outcome, I will heavily influence my findings and make them less reliable. So what Nietzsche describes is how historically and etymologically, good has been associated with powerful, rich, and the upper class. That's the first of the two approaches to morality he describes. He gives the example of the German word for bad, schlecht, being derived from the word schlicht, which just means simple or chaste. Good and bad are judgments made in a self-justifying way by the ones in power. By defining characteristics like strong and powerful as good, they are the ones that end up being seen as good. At the same time, those that do not have as much power and money are seen as bad just because of the material conditions of their lives. It is not a judgment that is based on decisions one takes or actions or characteristics. Instead, morality is used as a reflection of existing power relations to further justify the way that things are. Now is where I want to zoom in and discuss the implications of this. For Nietzsche, during the majority of the text, this is presented as a period of time in the past, as one way that people have defined morality. It is the opposite but also the condition to the development he and I will describe later. Only in one brief moment, in a sort of afterthought between parentheses, he lets this idea sink in further and reflects on it. He says, quote, "The seigneurial privilege of giving names even allows us to conceive of the origin of language itself as a manifestation of the power of the rulers. They say, this is so and so. They set their seal on everything, and every occurrence with a sound, and thereby take possession of it, as it were." Unquote. To those of you that are familiar with Foucault and post-structuralism, this might sound familiar. You can see here how Foucault was heavily influenced by Nietzsche in his discourse theory. Basically, this first essay is kind of a pre-version of a discourse analysis. That means looking at a social phenomenon or word or place or group of people by means of the way that they are discussed in society, the discourse around them. For instance, if you want to know what the Orient, quote-unquote Orient is, you have to look at how Western scholars have linguistically and academically created the Orient as their other, as Edward Said describes in Orientalism. Here's a video on that topic. The most crucial part of this is something you might not even have noticed. The word to be. Being of the Orient, women, art, or morality is in itself constituted by the discourse around it. It is not a stagnant thing that we can define if we look close enough. It is not a structure, a stagnant structure. It is post-structure. And this discourse is shaped by power dynamics. The ones that have the power, be it economic or class or academic, are the ones that shape the discourse. So what Nietzsche is saying in this small afterthought is that in a way we could imagine that even language itself originated as a way of those in power to maintain the status quo. Or at least that a lot of words that we use stem from this dynamic. Since there is no universal truth, there is no universal definition of what morality is, so the discourse around it kind of defines it for a given culture, and this discourse is then shaped by power dynamics. As I said, it's very clear how that influenced Foucault, and it's a fascinating thought in the middle of the genealogy. So, that was the first way in which humans have lived and defined morality for Nietzsche. He associates it with the Romans and the aristocrats. Then, when Jesus came along, things changed. Throughout the text, this other approach to morality is first associated with Judaism, but then often brought into the context of Christianity. Here I will mostly describe it as a view of morality tied to a monotheist religion with the promise of the last judgment and an afterlife in heaven, since these are the important features here. Historically, this change occurs during and because of the spread of Christianity in the Roman Empire, where Christians were an oppressed minority during the beginning. They were what made up the schlicht or schlecht, chaste or bad lower class, so a different approach to good and bad arose as a reaction to the existing one. The lower class, oppressed and powerless, feels what Nietzsche calls ressentiment towards the powerful, an emotion of rejecting the powerful based on feeling inferior to them. This ressentiment develops into a rejection of everything that makes up the upper class, their strength, their power, their pride, their ambition. We cannot be like that turns into we don't want to be like that. Morality is flipped around, and being poor, being humble, being weak is seen as morally good. This perspective is, again, making a virtue of what already is. But there is way more to it. So, firstly, while this seemingly is a drastic change, in the end it maintains the system and is very convenient for the upper class. This is why I would say this view is still around and often reproduced in kind of hidden forms. I talked about it in my video about Pierre Bourdieu if you're interested in that dynamic. Basically, it's just the idea that if we make poverty a virtue, we can very conveniently look away from inequalities and just maintain the system as it is. This is exactly what Nietzsche criticizes about the second approach. But the problem lies even deeper, because the real motivation and driver behind this virtualization of the unjust status quo is religion. People are told that they have to live a humble, poor, virtuous life, but enduring that will reward them in the afterlife. That is when they will get to be the superior and powerful. Two mechanisms take place here. First, the rejection of life, something that Nietzsche was very concerned with. He criticizes that this way of living for the sake of an expected afterlife rejects the very thing that we have, which is this life and everything it has to offer. The afterlife is not even assured. Second, what I would say is the cycle of domination and subjugation is not broken here. While they supposedly reject oppression and domination, they do in the end aim for the very thing they reject, just not in this world. Thereby, the, in my views, flawed logic is not broken but just transported into a different sphere. So, these are the two views of morality that Nietzsche distinguishes in his first essay. While he criticizes both of them and uses harsh language for both, many say that he actually argues for a return to the first Roman approach, or something similar. We can definitely say that he is not a fan of the second one and sees it as a rejection of the will and of life itself. Towards the end of the first essay, there is a fictional dialogue between two undefined people that takes up the points mentioned in the essay. It's very funny, so I'm going to do a small reenactment of it now to finish this first part of the series on the genealogy of morality. Hi. So, observing the state of the world and morality, I cannot but notice that humans are beginning to see weakness as a virtue. Go on. Well, and powerlessness is seen as charity, and fear as humility, and submission to those you hate as obedience. Not being able to seek vengeance is seen as not wanting to seek vengeance. And they're trying to love their enemies, but cannot even do so without getting nervous. Go on. They think that God gives the hardest fate to those he loves most, and they see life as a preparation for what comes after. They think they will be redeemed for everything. But really, I cannot go on anymore. This is so full of lies. I cannot even endure talking about it. No, keep on observing a little longer. What are they saying about ressentiment? Okay, oh my god, okay, I try. They're saying that they are the good ones, the just ones, and they're saying that they're going to wait for the last judgment, and they're waiting for that day in hope. Okay, that's too much. You can stop now. Yeah, so this whole dialogue is literally just these people not even being able to talk about how dumb humans are, basically. Okay, thank you for watching, and please consider liking and subscribing if you enjoyed the video and want to see the next part. Bye bye!